Hey everyone, Mr. Young here with section 1A, part 2, summarizing data with tables. In this section, we're going to learn to make and interpret either a frequency table or a relative frequency table. Let's talk about summarizing data. The easiest way to summarize data is in a table. And when you think table, I really want you to think like a tally table or a tally chart. And that's essentially what a frequency table is. Let's start off though by describing a distribution. The distribution of some variable tells us what values the variable can take and how often. So on the next slide, when we do our first example, we are going to focus on what values can the variable take and how often is it taking those values. And how often can be one of two ways. It can be the number of times that we see it take that value or the proportion of times. And sadly, we don't just call these number and proportion tables. We have fancier names because this is statistics. We're going to call them frequency tables. So frequency is just a fancy word for count. A frequency table shows us the number or count of individuals that have each particular value for that variable. We want to be even fancier than that. Let's say we have a relative frequency table. So let's talk about this word relative. What we really mean is relative to the total. So we have some total. How many individuals did we gather data from? Relative to that, how many people said yes? So really what this means is we're taking a proportion or a fraction, right? So think of a proportion as a fraction. That's what it is, or a percentage. And more often than not, we're going to use percentages. Sometimes counts are great, but if we have data from two different data sets, let's say from our class versus the senior class, counts aren't going to be all that helpful. If we say two people in our class have, let's say, five or more pets, but in the senior class, it's like 30 people. Well, that's because the senior class is way bigger than our class. But if we did that in percentages, we would see a different number. So here's an example. We can see a categorical variable here because we're given categories. So we sort of want to make a tally chart. Remember that a distribution tells us what values a variable can take and how often. So let's talk about what values a variable can take. I'm going to pick one in person. That is a value that this variable can take. How many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It took that 12 times. So I'm going to call that the frequency. Sometimes we'll just call it FREQ. I'm sort of running out of space, but we've got a frequency of 12 and the actual value, or you could write preferred method. This particular example is talking about preferred method of communication for 50 students. It says the same 50 students because I stole this example from another thing. So then I'm going to do that for the next one. I'm going to pick my next category and we're going to count all of those up. But for the sake of time, I'm going to skip ahead to what this looks like. I don't think you need me to count all of them and figure out exactly what's going on here. Maybe we do social media next and you can count all of those. But let's skip ahead. So here's my nice little graph. You can see, sorry, it's not a graph, it's a table. I labeled it frequency table. We often don't do that, but we will give it a label of what variable are we measuring, and then we will label frequency, or like you saw me do, FREQ. I got to all 50 students. I have a little total row. My total count is 50. These guys are all in counts. We're looking pretty good. Now let's talk about relative frequency. Relative frequency, remember, just means relative to the total. So my in person, I still have 12 people, but that's 12 out of 50. So 12 out of 50 would be 0.24. So 0.24 we could write if we wanted to keep it as a decimal, or we said before you could sort of use a fraction, but it's better to have a decimal. If you wanted to have a proportion, or most people are going to feel more comfortable as a percentage, converting that 0.24 to 24%. So again, let's do all that division. Each of these is going to get now divided by 50. So we've got 2% on phone call. And of course, I have a fancy one for us. So let me skip ahead. And there we go. We did in person together. 12 out of 50 was 24%. We have all these other percentages. What's great about percentages? We know they add up to 100%. Again, I could not compare these 50 students to the entire senior class or the entire Woodstock Academy student body because you don't want to compare a group of 50 to a group of 1100. But you could compare percentages to see if there are some differences. And the good news here is if you've got excuse me, not quantitative, if you've got a categorical variable, this is as far as you can go. You add them up, you have your little counts, and you move on. So you either make a frequency table or a relative frequency table. Sometimes I'm a monster and I'm going to ask you to create both, which is pretty much what we're doing for this section. But we're done. Of course, that means it's your turn. Go ahead and pause, start this example, see what you can do with it, and then we'll go over it. Finish this problem up. Make a frequency table. Okay, so this is talking about some pop quiz and the number of correct answers. So I'm just going to say number correct. And then we'll start with frequency. So number correct, we got 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. A little longer. And then I'm just going to put my frequency counts in here, what I saw for each thing. And then we'll go over just one of them. Let's pick on 5 because I can find those. I should be able to find 4 5s, and there they are. And let me just make sure I didn't miscount, not any other 5s hiding in there. I think I'm good. I'm going to just make one big table where I combine my relative frequencies. We still have 50 students for this problem. That means for our total, we are out of 50. For our percentage, we'll be out of 100%. Dividing these is pretty easy because 1 out of 50, we're basically just doubling those. So we'd be at 2%, 4%, 4%, 8%, 16, 30, 28, and 8. And I can go ahead and stick little percent signs in for each of those. If you like, you can do it all as one sort of table where here's my frequencies, here's my relative frequencies, but most of you probably made two separate tables because usually we're only going to need to make one. As long as you have your totals there, people will be able to divide and figure out what you did. We do have this little follow-up question of number 4. What proportion, and let me stop here and say, anytime you see the word proportion in this class, you are okay to also write it as a percentage. But what proportion of students got fewer than 7 questions correct? So fewer than 7, remember, will not include 7. Fewer than 7, we are just looking here. So a couple ways to do this. You could add all these up. 8 and 4 is 12, plus 2, plus 2, plus 1. That looks like 17 out of 50 if you wanted to write it as an actual proportion, but I would rather you go ahead and just give me a percentage there. And then get used to seeing questions like this. This is sort of new to us, but it's a very important stats question. It basically says, interpret this. What does this mean? Does this result support the professor's belief that most students did not complete the reading assignment? Well, looks like 34% of students failed, right? Fewer than 7 correct means you got a 6 out of 10. Me, it sounds like 34% of students maybe didn't do the reading. If you got 7 right or more on the reading, you probably did it. So does this support it? I don't think so. Maybe your answer was different, but as long as you are relating your answer to this 34%, So if you said, yeah, 34% didn't pass, so they didn't do the reading. Okay, that's that's not really most students. But again, we want to try to use our numbers and come up with an answer. That's really what statistics is about. So I am going to say, though, for number four, it's 34%. And then I'm going to say, does this support it? No. Really, the reality here is most students passed the quiz. Okay. That's it for this section. You know, you've got plenty of other things to do before you try a mastery check. Check in with me if you've got some questions, and I'll see you next time.